Before we start this morning's orientation, antes de orientación vamos a hacer un tradición clásico, estilo japonés. Dígame, radio, Taiso. Hi. It's going to be led by Richard Moria. Hi. Okay. Hi. Minna tatte kudasai. Everybody stand up. Levántate, por favor. No music. Okay. Hi. Here, Richard. Hi. Ich, yi, san, shi, ich, yi, san, shi. 1、2、3、4、1、2、3、4。
はい、Roger。1。La música del texto. Do you remember guided tradition? Fuerte ese aplauso. Where are you from?
All workshop moderators, please come up.
Yeah, please. Okay, so
agora a gente vai falar um pouquinho sobre os painelistas que vão participar do workshop de jovens. So we're going to introduce the workshops, okay? So the morning session will be from 10 to 12, and the afternoon session will be from 1 to 3. Okay, and so let's go one by one. Workshop A1 is business. So are they here? Are Sebastian and Ken Tanamura here?
Ken Tanamura, on stage please. That's right, I thought we said it.
Okay, so I'll just read it out loud then. It's in your program, but so for the business one, it'll be located at this Buddhist church and Soko Gakuen classroom, and it'll be on the Ikigai concept. Okay, led by Sebastian and Ken. Okay, the next one, A2, the Nikkei Youth and Young Adult Identity and Networking, will be held at the Japanese Community Youth Council, JCYC, over there, outside.
Este trabajo para los jóvenes en el punto de beneficio cerca de acá, en la planta más se llama JCYC, que se acompañaron aquí.
O primeiro workshop será de business, de negócios, que será aqui. E o segundo é de Nikkei Jovens, Identidade e Networking, que será lá fora.
And next one, A3 is Family and Community, the Power of Our Stories. This will be led by Tom Ikeda.
La segunda, en ese trabajo, será Identidad Nikkeis, representado por el señor Tom Ikeda de la estación de Inoue.
O terceiro workshop será Família e Comunidade, o poder das nossas histórias. Será aqui também, ok?
My workshop is going to talk about story, personal stories. Densho means to pass stories on to the next generation, and we're going to talk about collecting and preserving and the importance of story. Thank you.
Thank you.
Historias intergeneracionales dentro de las primeras, segunda, tercera, cuarta. Será una discusión muy importante, muy interesante. En ese momento, buscando voluntarios para decir legalmente en este trabajo.
Okay, next, A4 is Civil Rights and Social Justice. It'll be located here, and this will be hosted by, oh, I'm sorry, did I skip one? Oh, okay, no, okay. And it'll be led by David Inoue from JCL.
La siguiente mesa de trabajo es el tópica de derechos civiles en justicia social, representado por el directivo de JCL, David Inoue, que crea acá.
So we're kind of doing two separate sessions. The morning session is going to be looking at the history of Nikkei in the Americas. So we'll be looking at, oh, go ahead.
En la primera parte de la sesión de esta mañana va a discutir la historia de la tradición antes de este momento.
So we'll have the perspective of Japanese Americans, Japanese Canadians, and also Japanese Latinos who were brought from Latin American countries to the United States during the war, and some of the injustices that all these communities have experienced. Nihongo
Okay, sorry. Now, going back to A2, the Nikkei Youth workshop, we have Dr. Curtis Takada-Rooks.
Good morning, how are you doing? So for the A2 workshop, we're really looking to have the young folks come in. It's not that we don't want the senior folks, but the workshop is to talk with you and work, do some small group work so that you can tell us what the Nikkei means to you. And so we can get a better understanding and doing some of the work moving forward with the Nippon Foundation and some other organizations that work with the infrastructures in each of your countries to develop programs and other things. So particularly for those of you who are U40, please come to that workshop. We would love to have you there so we can hear your voice. So that way someone like me with gray hair doesn't put my words in your mouth.
Vamos a estar haciendo talleres, queremos gente joven que sea menor de 40 años y vamos a estar haciendo talleres sobre qué es lo que significa ser Nikkei. Por favor vengan y cuéntenos qué piensan para que podamos escuchar sus voces. Okay, thank you. Okay, next for the afternoon session.
Nesse workshop que está sendo falado agora, né? Eles estão procurando, vai ser feito com jovens com menos de 40 anos sobre a identidade Nikkei. Vai ser discutido sobre a identidade Nikkei. A gente quer ouvir a voz dos jovens.
Okay, next we have the afternoon session. B1, workshop B1 is the youth and young adults. The Youth and Young Adults Workshop, led by Koto Mitsutani from JCL National.
Ohayou gozaimasu. Ohayou gozaimasu. Thank you. I know that was cheesy. My name is Koto Mitsutani. I am with the JCL. I used to work with the youth in JCL. I'm super happy to be here. So I will be hosting an afternoon workshop along with Miki from Canada. Alex, can you stand up?
Soy Koto Mitsutani. Voy a estar en el workshop de juventud y Alex Miki, ¿podrías levantarte, por favor?
Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
How many people feel like they are a youth?
¿Cuántas personas se sienten jóvenes?
So all of the people who just raised their hands
Todas las personas que levantaron la mano
are invited to come attend our workshop.
Invitados a nuestro taller.
Yes, good.
Muchas gracias.
We're going to also be talking about Nikkei identity and what it means to be Nikkei for each of us.
Vamos a estar hablando sobre la identidad Nikkei y qué significa para cada uno ser Nikkei.
But we're also going to think of ideas of ways that we can all work closer together.
Y también vamos a pensar en ideas sobre cómo poder trabajar juntos mejor.
Este é o Koto Mitsutani, né? Ele ele vai ser o moderador, né, do workshop dos jovens e mais tarde do painel de jovens também.
So one note, if you would like to attend our workshop, please try to think of or look for a picture or an object that represents your Nikkei identity. We're going to be using those during our workshop.
Entonces, para todos los que estén interesados en el taller, por favor traigan una foto o un recuerdo que represente lo que signifique para ustedes el Nikkei.
Para o workshop vai ser usado então uma foto, pode até ser do celular, se não for uma foto, um item, um objeto também.
Thank you very much. Hope to see you there.
Okay, next we have B2 Identity, Culture and Community, led by Dr. Jane Yamashiro. She is the author of the book Redefining Japaneseness, and it's a very interesting book. She interviewed many Nikkei living in Japan, and so it's a very interesting book, and she will be introducing that, and also we will be, in that workshop, we'll be exploring what it means to be Nikkei or Japanese, how do ethnic identities intersect with other kinds of identities, and how we can think about, how can thinking about this would help us to make our communities more inclusive.
El B2 es Identidad, Cultura y Comunidad, por el Dr. Yamashiro, que tiene un libro que se llama Redefiniendo la Japonesidad, y habla de los Nikkeis que viven en Japón. Se trata de cómo intersecciona la identidad Nikkei con otras culturas. Y bueno, sobre la multicultural.
Outro workshop será de identidade, cultura e comunidade. Será ministrado pela doutora Jane Yamashiro, sobre redefinir o ser japonês. Será sobre o livro, né, dela, sobre redefinir ser japonês americanos e a terra ancestral. Será sobre o que é ser Nikkei ou japonês e como as etnias identificam, né, esses tipos diferentes, como elas pensam sobre como ajudar nas nossas comunidades, para como incluí-las.
Next we have, he can go later. Next we have B3, Family and Community, The Power of Our Stories, Case Stories. And Yoko Nishimura from the Japanese American National Museum will give a brief introduction.
Tenemos a Yoko Nishimura, que es del Museo Nacional de Japón, de Inmigración en Los Ángeles, para hacer la introducción.
Good morning, everybody. And our session is actually continuation from the morning session led by the Densho in the morning, the power of our story. And our session is more talking about more case study. So we are inviting a couple of the panelists. They are talking about their own project. And then also that we will show how, if you have those kind of project, and then, or if you have some story to tell, how people can share those story online. So hope I can see you everybody there.
Nuestra sesión es una continuación de la primera sesión de Power of Stories, el poder de nuestras historias, y vamos a estar tratando estudios de caso. Entonces, analistas que tienen estudios de caso. Entonces, si tienen alguna historia que contar, por favor vengan a presentar.
Nesse workshop, ela será ministrado pela Yoko Nishimura, que é do Museu Nacional Japonês Americano. Ela é sobre os projetos que têm sido documentados e compartilhados com as famílias Nikkei e as comunidades de várias formas, da família aos projetos da preservação de projetos compartilhados, né, até online e em filmes. Essa sessão será apresentado pelo Museu Nacional Japonês Americano e pelo Gen Discover Nikkei, um projeto, né, que será complementado sobre a preservação dos projetos de workshop.
And next, the final one is B4, Civil Rights and Social Justice. Yeah, earlier David Inoue introduced about that. Okay, next we have, back to A1, Business. We have Sebastian I'm sorry, so back to the B4, Civil Rights and Social Justice, Part 2.
Es la segunda parte de derechos civiles y justicia social.
So in the morning we'll be talking about history. In the afternoon we'll be talking about current activism of the Nikkei communities in North America.
Entonces la primera parte va a ser sobre historia y la segunda parte va a ser sobre activismo en comunidades nikkei.
Particularly how we partner with other organizations and other communities.
A primeira parte do workshop vai ser sobre a história e a segunda parte sobre as comunidades.
Thank you. Okay, and back to the first workshop, Business. We have Sebastian Kakazu.
Y bueno, para business tenemos a Sebastián Kakazu.
Hey, good morning. Everyone is sleeping. Ohayou gozaimasu. Buen día. Bon dia. Hey, we are holding a workshop about Ikigai. Ikigai is a Japanese concept about the purpose of life. ¿Sí? Vamos a tener un workshop, un taller, en el cual vamos a trabajar un concepto japonés que se llama Ikigai. Ikigai es el propósito de vida.
O workshop será sobre o tema Ikigai, que significa propósito de vida.
Okay. What we are going to do with Ken Teramura, he's from Canada. We are both coaches and we work as coach, but we help people to find in their life or in their professional business how to make this with purpose. Lo que vamos a hacer con Ken Teramura de Canadá, los dos somos coaches y estamos trabajando acompañando a las personas y a las empresas a que encuentren su propósito en esta vida. ¿Portugués? A gente vai passar com Ken Teramura un workshop que nós somos coaches y vai fazer como encontrar el propósito del negocio na vida también. So, we are glad to see a lot of people that are looking for what's your life purpose and business purpose. So we will really enjoy you to come to our workshop. ¿Sí? Nos esperamos, estamos muy ansiosos por tener este workshop. Esperamos que participen mucho para encontrar este propósito de vida. ¿Okay? Muchas gracias.
I'm David Inoue, the Executive Director of the Japanese American Citizens League here in the United States. We're the largest and oldest Asian American civil rights organization in this country. We have about 8,500 members and lead the chapters in 21 different states. Most of our chapters are based out here in the California area, though, where about 70% of Japanese Americans live in this country. I'm joined here today by Judge Maryka Omatsu of the National Association of Japanese Canadians, kind of our counterpart north of the border, and also Shimizu, who's here to talk about Japanese Latin American incarceration. Unfortunately, Korematsu is not able to join us this morning, so I apologize for that. Several of you probably were looking forward to hearing from her as well. So I will try and talk a little bit about her father's court case later on. Let me hand things over to Maryka, and she's going to do a little introduction, and then we're going to have a video to start off things on with her presentation.
Good morning, everyone. I'm very pleased to be here from Canada at my first COPANI conference. Can you hear me? Yeah? Okay. Canada is not much of a power in the world, and so it's strange for us when our leader is on the front page of Time magazine and the New York Times is writing about him, and I saw a talk show host speaking, saying, "Leader wearing blackface scandal," and he said, "Take a deep breath, Americans, it's not us." And he said, "Suck it up, Canada." And of course he was talking about our Prime Minister and wearing blackface. And really, that's a very good segue to the Canadian story, because Canadians have to suck it up, because relative to Americans, the treatment of Asians and Japanese Canadians was a lot worse. And I think when I speak to my friends down south here, that is, they're always surprised that Canada, which has today a good reputation, had such a bad history. And from 1895, we came in the 1880s, but from 1895 to 1950, there were 170 anti-Asian laws. And that didn't even really cover the kind of practices that happened. We were not allowed to swim in swimming pools, except on certain days and times. We couldn't live in certain areas. We couldn't eat in restaurants. And there were all kinds of restrictions that weren't even governed by the law. So the treatment of Canadian Japanese was significantly worse. And I'm going to talk about for a few minutes after the video, is about a redress struggle that we're involved in right now in Canada, in British Columbia, that we will be presenting to the British Columbia government in November. So in preparation for that redress movement, I made this video, which is a short video, which sets out the Canadian history, as well as our case, our sort of legal case against the BC government. So, please.
Canada declared war on Japan after the December 7, 1941 bombing of Pearl Harbor. The War Measures Act was invoked and applied to those of Japanese ancestry, as it had been against German and Italian Canadians in 1939. However, by comparison, German and Italian Canadians were largely unaffected. Those with Japanese ancestry were branded as enemy aliens, ordered to carry out cleansing, property dispossession, and community destruction. Some powerful forces spoke against the removal. The Army's Lieutenant Governor Ken Stewart reported, "I cannot see that they constitute the slightest menace to national security." RCMP Assistant Commissioner Frederick Meade agreed, "No fear of sabotage need be expected from the Japanese in Canada." The Prime Minister's Executive Assistant, Jack Bickerstone, confirmed, "I don't think that there was a member of cabinet who honestly believed that the Japanese were dangerous. It was a British Columbia problem." Initially, Ottawa resisted taking more extreme measures. Despite no evidence of the security risk, BC politicians began a concerted campaign to cleanse the province of Japanese Canadians. In January 1942, Premier John Hart appointed Cabinet Minister George Pearson to lead a BC delegation to Ottawa, where they joined forces with Federal Cabinet Minister Ian Mackenzie to demand the uprooting of all, including women and children. Responsible politicians were BC Federal MP Robert Miki, along with Ministers Royal Maitland and Harry Perry, CCF leader Harold Winch, and MLA Alvin Neal. MP Mackenzie went on public record stating, "It is the government's plan to get these people out of BC as fast as possible. It is my personal intention, as long as I remain in public life, to see they never come back here." In the end, Ottawa conceded to BC's demands. On February 24th, 1942, by ordering, all persons of the Japanese race are to leave the protected area. The order was executed quickly. The BC Security Commission, a federal agency, directed the uprooting, dispersal, and incarceration. It involved BC Representative John Schertz and MLAs Maitland, Pearson, and Winch. Camps were often erroneously referred to as internment camps. The Geneva Conventions state a country cannot intern its own nationals, only enemy foreigners. BC refused to pay for children's education, a provincial obligation. Camps relied largely on religious groups and their own resources. More than 2,600 men in 24 labor camps along the Trans-Canada built roads in the interior. The last camp closed in March 1946. To hasten the removal of families from the province, the BC Security Commission advertised these laborers as both industrious and loyal. Resistors to the breakup of families were sent to a POW camp in Ontario. In 1943, George Collins, chair of BC's Security Commission, ordered, "These people will be dispersed across Canada in small groups and exiled from BC." In contrast, Japanese Americans were allowed to return to their homes and businesses before the end of the war. However, in 1945, Canada, at the urging the Rockies or being shipped to Japan. In the end, 13,000 people were sent east, and 4,000 were exiled to Japan. BC government and the city of Vancouver colluded with the custodian of enemy property in dispossession. Vancouver City Council wanted to redevelop the Powell Street area. The city urged William Pearson, the custodian's Vancouver representative, to sell all Japanese Canadian homes and businesses in that area. McPherson collaborated with the BC's Municipal Affairs Minister Edward Bridgman to obtain municipal property assessment records. Then, McPherson met with Vancouver officials to discuss their interest in acquiring properties. In January 1943, despite Ottawa's initial reluctance, Cabinet bowed to BC pressure and granted the custodian of enemy property the right to dispose of everything without Japanese Canadians' consent. BC judges Sidney Smith and David Whiteside approved each forced sale. The proceeds from the sales paid for the incarceration, contrary to the Geneva Conventions. In the U.S., there was no seizure or sale of property.
Before we just, I want to make sure, is everybody okay with English? Do we have anybody who needs translation to Spanish? Wonderful. And I will try and speak slower because I tend to speak very fast. So, for those of you English is not your first name, I will try and help. Maryka, I will pass it back up to you to continue talking about what's going on with you all in Canada.
Is it working now? Just an update, since this video was made a year or so ago. We have gotten a small grant from the BC government, and we've had community consultations throughout the country, and also mostly in the province of British Columbia, to get the asks from the community as to what they think would be appropriate, given the role of the province of BC in our history. And I'd like the people here who are involved in the BC Redress Steering Committee, if they would mind standing up. Thank you. I'm on the steering committee as well, and it's been an honor for me to work with them because we've had to work like dogs. And we have, it is an honor because when Miki, Stand Up Too, and I were involved in redress in the 80s, I don't think either of us thought that we would be involved in a redress movement again. But here we are. Anyway, we're finalizing our report at the Community Asks as we speak, and we will be presenting our report to the government at the end of the month, or the middle of October actually. And then the government said they'll get back to us in November. So hopefully you will hear some good news from Canada. Thank you.
The video, I guess before I begin my presentation, I'm Grace Shimizu, I'm from the United States. I wanted to start with an acknowledgement that we are gathered here today on the ancestral territory of the Ohlone peoples. And I want to pay respect to their elders, both past and present, as well as living descendants and future generations. The Ohlone people have been and continue to be stewards of this land which was taken under unjust and violent circumstances, resulting in forced relocation, imprisonment, family separation and dispersal, and genocide that continues to have devastating effects on indigenous communities. So we acknowledge the Ohlone people's inseparable connection to this land upon which we gather today, and the strengths of their communities to survive the devastating effects of displacement, white supremacy, and settler colonialism in the San Francisco Bay Area. The history and present experiences of indigenous community are essential for understanding the context of the Nikkei experience in the Americas and the significance of the Nikkei experience to current day events and what we mean by solidarity. So, I don't know if it's right. The approach that I want to do is start with a video clip that kind of shows what happened to the Nikkei people in the Americas, and how they were actually renditioned during World War II, kidnapped and brought to the United States for imprisonment. And so the clip will kind of show what happened to especially the Peruvians, by highlighting the story of Archibayama. But then I guess I want to follow that up with kind of putting it in a broader context, because it wasn't just people of Japanese ancestry, that were affected like this. And then it'll segue into also our redress struggle. So, do you want to go ahead with the...
Archibayama was just 13 years old and living comfortably in Peru when he was forced out of the only home he had ever known. During World War II, the United States government, in collaboration with several Latin American countries, orchestrated the forced removal and internment of over 2,000 persons of Japanese ancestry, which included both citizens of 13 Latin American countries as well as Japanese immigrants. Like young Archie Wayama, the vast majority were Japanese Peruvians. Shortly after the Japanese military attack on Pearl Harbor, community leaders were scapegoated and rounded up for detention throughout the Americas. In Peru, a blacklist had been generated. While not based on any real or credible evidence of Japanese subversive activity, the blacklist targeted businessmen, community leaders, and educators. In collaboration with Peruvian officials, the U.S. used the blacklist as the basis for rounding up hostages. These hostages were then to be traded for Americans held by Japan. Most of the Japanese Latin Americans were interned in a Department of Justice camp in Crystal City, Texas. A 10-foot fence, guard towers, and floodlights surrounded this camp. The camp also held persons of Italian and German ancestry from the United States and Latin America, as well as Japanese Americans. But for Art and the other internees, their long ordeal did not end with the close of World War II. The remaining Japanese Latin Americans were told that they were illegal aliens and would be deported. And because the Latin American governments initially refused to allow these internees to return, over 1,000 were thus deported to war-devastated Japan.
The legislation that I am about to sign provides for a restitution payment to each of the 60,000 survivors. Surviving Japanese Americans of the 120,000 who were relocated or detained. Yet no payment can make up for those lost years. So what is most important in this bill has less to do with property than with honor. For here we admit a wrong. Here we reaffirm our commitment as a nation to equal justice under the law.
However, Art was denied justice. Under this law, Japanese Latin Americans were deemed ineligible for redress as they were not U.S. citizens or residents at the time of internment. In an effort to call attention to their hidden history and to support efforts for redress, the Campaign for Justice was born.
The Campaign for Justice started in 1996, and it was founded by individuals and organizations who wanted to seek redress for Japanese Latin Americans.
In response to public pressure, the Department of Justice offered a settlement of only $5,000 each, just 1/4 of the $20,000 redress provided to the Japanese Americans.
I wanted to get the equal justice. I wanted to regain the dignity for my parents.
While supporting the decision of those who accepted the settlement, Art Shimizu, along with several others, chose to opt out of the settlement. He then filed his own lawsuit, preferring to fight for both redress and a full disclosure for violations committed by the United States during World War II. Despite his efforts, Art was once again denied justice. His case was dismissed in the final months of 2002.
You know, it's not like we wanted to come here. We didn't want to come here. We were forced to come here. We were brought here by the government. So how can that be legal?
Until the crime is over, meaning it has been fully acknowledged and fully compensated, it is ongoing.
My family and I are very proud of my father for his pursuit for justice and for his courage to hold the U.S. government accountable for its wrongdoing. Despite my father's and others' efforts to educate the American public, the Japanese-Peruvian internment is still widely unknown. We need the U.S. government to apologize and acknowledge what it did. We need educational funds, and we need full disclosure. So what happened to the Japanese Peruvians will not happen to my family, to any other family, or to any other group again.
Okay, So when we look at this World War II period, I think we're now realizing that the incarceration of over 120,000 US citizen and resident immigrants of Japanese ancestry in 10 concentration camps was part of a larger scheme of how the US government perceived and dealt with the enemy during times of crisis or wartime. So this scheme included an enemy alien program in which over 31,000 immigrants of Italian, German, and Japanese American communities in the United States and those taken from Latin America, we were classified as enemy aliens or illegal aliens before, during, and after the war, and interned in another set of detention sites and concentration camps. Over 50 detention sites under the authority of the Department of Justice and the US Army. So what many of us have known as the World War II Japanese American experience is now put in a broader international context of mass relocation, internment, and forced deportation of over 150,000 men, women, and children, not only persons of Japanese ancestry, but also Germans, Italians, and Jewish and Latin American ancestry. And then if we add the Japanese Canadians to this mix, so this is like over 170,000 people that we know about. So, but it shows a shocking picture of how the US government initiated and orchestrated a program of massive civil rights violations, war crimes, and crimes against humanity, spanning 2 continents before, during, and after World War II in the name of national security. So in the late 30s, you know, as turmoil was brewing in Europe and the Far East, the US government began to prepare for its possible involvement in the war. Preparations include surveillance of Japanese, German, and Italian resident aliens, compiling lists of so-called potentially dangerous people, and even the plans for internment and deportation. This was massive racial and ethnic profiling of these communities, not based on action or evidence, but based on vague profiling of who could be potentially dangerous. And the target of enemy aliens was not limited to immigrants inside of the US. The United States government went outside its borders and violated the rights of civilians in over 18 Latin American countries. This is over 6,000 men, women, and children of German, Italian, and Japanese ancestry, both immigrant residents as well as citizens of those countries. They were taken from their homes and businesses, forcibly deported, and brought to the United States for internment in concentration camps. They were taken for the purpose of prisoner exchange and to secure US commercial, economic, and political interests in Latin America. My father was one of the nearly 1,800 persons of Japanese ancestry taken from Peru. Let's see. In total, so we have 31,000 of these enemy aliens in the United States and from Latin America. And so they were detained and interned for reasons of national security, but without charges, incarcerated for indefinite detention, and held without trial. And for those in the US who were detained and given a hearing, they weren't told of any charges against them, not allowed to confront witnesses, not allowed to have counsel of attorneys, and often not having interpreters. So over 4,800 people, and this includes US citizens who were the minor children of the Issei parents, they were forcibly deported to war zones of the Far East and Europe in the prisoner exchange. Most internees were released from camp at the end of the war in 1946, but some were still interned until 1949 in Ellis Island. So some internees had been interned for 7 years. So after, Allied victory and Japan's formal surrender, the hardship facing internees from Latin America didn't end. The US government informed our families that we were illegal aliens and had to leave the United States and the Western Hemisphere. Most of the 1,400 remaining Japanese Peruvian internees wanted to go back to their homes in Peru, but the Peruvian government initially refused to let them re-enter, even if they were Peruvian citizens or married to Peruvian citizens. So as a result, between November 1945 and June 1946, over 900 Japanese Latin Americans were deported to war-devastated Japan under US military occupation. There were more than 300 Japanese Peruvians that were able to remain in the United States to fight deportation. And of those remaining, some were sponsored out of camp by Japanese American relatives, and so they could leave camp. Over 2/3 were paroled by the US government and placed under the sponsorship of Seabrook Farms in New Jersey and used as cheap labor. Eventually, about 100 Japanese Peruvians were able to return to Peru. So later in the 1950s, the immigration laws in the United States changed, and that allowed the enemy aliens from Latin America, they were able to change their status from illegal alien and begin the process of permanent residency. And then many of them actually became US citizens. And then for the internees in Latin America who were exchanged during or deported after the war, they really faced dire circumstances. Basically starvation conditions, the physical destruction of the land. And then for the children it was really rough because oftentimes the kids from the United States or Latin America, Japanese wasn't their language. They either spoke Spanish or English. So they experienced a lot of discrimination like that. And then later, when people are able to review the records, like from the National Archives and other places, they show that the so-called dangerous enemy aliens, there was often no specific evidence of subversive activity. So they lost years of their lives on the basis of being a potential danger. Okay, and so we are still feeling the impact of that wartime experience to today. And then we're getting a sense of that. How does that kind of feeling, both physically, mentally, emotionally, get passed on generation to generation? And we're just beginning to uncover it, let alone speak about it. And then, it's not really just looking at the impact of what it had on our families and communities, but what does it mean for the nations that we live in? What does it mean for their democracies, our understanding of the rights of citizens, the rights of immigrants, not only the rights that you have within a country, your civil rights, but what about your human rights, your international rights under international law? Okay, so in this hidden internment clip, you got a kind of taste of our struggle for redress. So our struggle is integrally related to the Japanese American struggle for redress. Just like for us, I think we became part of the Japanese community in camp. While some people came to the United States as being immigrants, we came to the United States by being brought here by the US government in violation of our rights. We lived in the same camp, in the Department of Justice camps with Japanese Americans, and began that process of integrating into the community. And then after the war, for those that remained in the United States, we went to communities where Japanese Americans lived, or also where other Latinos lived because of the Spanish language. And so through that, I think what we see as another example of what's the relationship of folks with citizenship and folks with immigrant status, and even within families having that kind of mixed status. And this is something that's like, even though our experience came from the wartime, this has many similarity with the experience of many mixed status communities today, especially when the new immigrants come from places and times of crisis and war. So then when we look at the redress movement, here we find also we are integrated into that experience, but it's not acknowledged. In fact, many in the Japanese American community don't even know the Japanese Latin Americans existed unless they were in the same camps. And so we have faced a real uphill challenge of how do we preserve our history? How do we pass on our history in the face of a government that has tried to ignore it or suppress it and erase it, and also within our own Japanese American community that does not understand what happened, that has not embraced our existence and our history as part of the community as well. And let's see. So then in the times of redress, we also thought, oh, this is great news. The Japanese American community is trying to hold the US government accountable for these kind of violations. We were in the same camps where there were Japanese Americans. So we should also, be able to have redress as well, acknowledgement of what happened, an apology, and full disclosure of what happened. But what we found was at different places with different Japanese American leaders, we were told, this redress is not for you, or we were told, for the greater good, you're going to have to be sacrificed, so that a larger group of people can get redress. Or let's take it in stages. First we'll go for the Japanese American redress, and later, your rights can be defended as well. And so we had problems being able to testify at the commission hearings. We were able, though, to testify in LA, Chicago, and New York, and were part of the government recommendations, their report. So, that was a big blow to our families to learn that we were excluded from the redress because we were deemed ineligible for redress because we were illegal aliens. But how could we be illegal aliens when it was the government that brought us here and interned us? So then, during the most of attention, when you look at Japanese American redress, goes to the passage of the Civil Liberties Act. There is not much research done or discussion about the implementation of that redress, what it actually took to get it carried out. And so what we are very grateful is being able to join the delegations led by the JCL and the National Coalition for Redress and Reparations when they went to Washington, D.C. to monitor the implementation of the Civil Liberties Act. So we were able to go with them and then plead our case to the US government, saying we should be included in this act as well. But then we were told, by the officials, oh, we don't know about this. So many of the officials didn't even know about the Japanese Latin American experience. And basically said, oh, this sounds bad, but I'm sorry, you're going to have to sue us. So in 1996, we did sue them. And that was the Mochizuki case, which ended in a controversial settlement agreement. So while the Japanese Americans under the Civil Liberties Act got an apology letter and compensation of $20,000 for the surviving people and the education fund, the government told the Japanese Latin Americans, you'll get an apology letter and $5,000 for the human rights violations that you suffered. And then when you look at the letter, it doesn't mention the word Japanese, it doesn't mention the word Latin America, it doesn't talk about the scope of the violations, so that other government people in the future or other people can realize what mistake had been done, you know? And then, the compensation was $5,000, and the thought was we were getting the leftover money that the Japanese Americans got. So there was supposed to be enough money to pay for the Latin Americans. But as it turned out, there wasn't enough. And so they had to go for extra money, you know, to carry out their settlement agreement. So it's been an uphill battle. You know, we had actually 5 lawsuits. We had 2 pieces of legislation that died in committee. And then we could not find justice in the United States. And that's why the Shibayama brothers filed their petition with the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. The significance of that international body is when you can't find justice in your home country, you have somewhere to go. The problem with that is they don't have enforcement power. So, but they are able to make law, case law, that could be helpful for other victims of human rights violations. So we waited 13 years to have a hearing before that commission, and that's what you saw on the tape. Now it's 2019. This means we're waiting 16 years for a ruling, you know, and so that basically shows that we have not yet gotten justice. And the unfortunate thing is most of our people have died, you know, and so what does it mean to have people, Nikkei people, and in the United States, part of the Japanese American community whose rights have not been upheld or vindicated, and for the level of war crimes and crimes against humanity. What does that mean when our own Nikkei people are standing up for other communities? What we doing for our own community? You know, and that goes to a number of the questions that are raised at the COPANI. How do you look at Nikkei? Who's Nikkei? Who's included? Who's excluded? How do you look at community? Who's in the community? Who's not in the community? You know, how do you look at citizenship status? How do you look at immigrant status? All those kind of things come together at this COPANI conference to look at, you know? And what does it mean to really embrace your role as a citizen of your own country, you know, and to put forward your civic responsibility as a member of your nation, you know? What does it mean when these kind of issues within your own community are not addressed? And then how does it, you know, what does it mean for struggles overall? Especially when in the world now we see the rise of really right-wing forces that have captured governments that are doing the same things they were doing in World War II, talking about white supremacy, talking about expansion of their control of other countries, those kind of things. So, maybe I stopped.
Actually, Grace, I really appreciate the sort of where you were kind of leading off there, because that was kind of where I wanted to go with my first question on the panel, is the incarceration experience and what happened in World War II was a discrete point in time, but it has had a lasting impact on the various Nikkei communities, whether it's Japanese Americans, Canadian Americans, or the Japanese Latinos who were displaced from this country. What do you see as sort of the most powerful impact of the incarceration experience that still permeates our community today? I think I can answer this already. Gotta think about
it. For our community, in addition to the incarceration, it was the dispersal, because as a result, we have no community really to speak of in a sense of a vibrant community. We have this 90% intermarriage rate, and the fifth generation in my community is mostly white and non-Japanese. And it's strange because each family in our community witnessed this change in our DNA gene pool. And my husband, who is white, for example, when he first married me decades ago, he married into a family and he was an ethnic minority. He was a racial minority. Now today, I am a racial minority in my own family. So the incarceration obviously had a serious traumatic effect and affected education of the young people and everyone else. But the dispersal and the destruction of our community is what is still going on today.
Also, it's really still the conflict within our own Japanese American community. We, to this day, all these years, have had this situation of the dissenters and the no-nos and the draft resistors. They were ostracized and from the Japanese American community. I didn't even realize my father was a dissenter until I first went to the Tule Lake pilgrimage. So go to pilgrimages. Satsuki Ina, raise your hand. She's a warrior. Because then I realized, oh my gosh, there's other families like mine. Because since my father was ostracized from our own Japanese American community, we weren't part of JACL. We didn't come to Japantown. We didn't do all those kinds of activities. No. We did some kind of social events with just our family. But, even my uncle said, well, don't talk about this to your Uncle Fred unless he brings it up. I mean, that was the family dynamics. And we, to this day, for many of you, that aren't aware, we just had our JACL convention in Utah, and the issue that we wanted addressed was really an apology from the JACL to the Tule Lake resistors, and I mean, believe you me, that was quite a discussion and event. And I got very emotional because, I felt that there are stories that are still coming out. So here, this is, when you think about it, this is over 75 years ago that we had Executive Order 9066. And we are still now coming out with stories from different families of how even some of the leaders, I will say, I was told, from the JACL were abused, where there was violence against them. But, you know, now we still, I mean, I was even under the impression, this is how naive I was. So when my father's case was reopened in 1983 officially, that I thought, oh, well, the JA community is really strong, they all support each other. I mean, yeah, there's my father, I'm born a man, but, you know, I was certainly naive. And the fact that we still are trying to work together to find common ground, to make sure that, because if we don't apologize, if we don't make these apologies, if we don't, you know, this is like the governments. I mean, but it's more than that, it's the compensation, right? That's, I mean, because you have to, like I said, throw money out there, you don't get anybody's attention. And it's, you know, the significant impact of this human rights violation of the violation of civil liberties is what needs to be really recognized and promoted, because we are still doing it today. This is the problem. We are still repeating history. I'm involved in a campaign, Stop Repeating History, because obviously this country, and I can't comment about your other countries, but this country has not learned the lessons of history. And that's where all of us need to participate, where all of us need to be sure that this generation, you know, I'm getting old. Obviously, I walked in here with a cane. I'm getting old, and I'm worried about this generation and future generations, because they need to know the lessons of history so that we don't keep repeating them. Because now they kind of keep changing. Like I said, you know, we have the Japanese American incarceration, you know, we have the issues that the Muslims, Americans are fighting, and the South Asians and you know, the Middle Eastern communities, Latinos, you know, even African Americans, because we, you know, that another story is our mass incarceration. You know, mass incarceration is nothing new. And so this is what's important to remember, that we need to make this effort. Everyone needs to participate and be sure they're trying to do their part. And over time, it's sometimes a little bit more, sometimes a little bit less, but that's what it means to be civically engaged, whether you're in Canada, in the US, in Japan, in Latin America, in Mexico. It all means to be present and fighting for each other in our human rights, because obviously we have leaders who are totally just disregarding that. And that we should be outrageous about.
The question was around the impact on the...
What do you see as the greatest impact today of the incarceration experience on our community? Karen always knows very civilized topics.
Well, the greatest impact, because to me the World War II experience is not just incarceration; it's about deportation too. You know, so it goes to like, how are we really looking at our history and understanding, and how, you know, being open to reconsidering what we've learned, and what voices have not been added, and what are the implications that those voices, those experiences are not part of the popular understanding of this history. You know, so in that, I think, you know, the impact, what's good is in this more recent period, we've been able to talk more publicly and within ourselves about just the impact, personally, as individuals or our community, and kind of what it means for the nation too. So dealing with the trauma, trying to understand it and the healing. So that's been very important. But I think what's come up is that we as Nikkei people need to really look more closely, who are we talking about? Who are we? You know, and not make assumptions. Look at our identity, look at what we consider as Nikkei community, and kind of what in each of our countries, in each of our communities, how have we looked at our survival and how we want to empower ourselves because I think in all the Americas, we face the same thing of we got to survive in deep, deep racism. You know, we have to fight against white supremacy. We got to deal with this relationship between citizenship status and immigrant status. And this is not to, also mention, the gender dynamics and sexuality, all these things that affect our community and our survival as Nikkei people. So we have a real challenge, I think, before us of like, how do we understand our history and what's our responsibility? Because pretty soon the people, who had direct experience during World War II, they're not going to be here to express it themselves. So it's a challenge for all of us to say, what's important to remember? What is it that we need to pass on? And this is a responsibility that we as individuals and a community have to decide whether we're going to take it up and how we're going to take it up. And that it's also a responsibility of the people in our countries as well. It's not just the Nikkei burden, or like we don't have ownership. This is part of all our country's history. So they have to be held accountable too.
I think we're on the last point, actually. I think just as Karen is going to take up the mantle of concerning her father's story, that's why all of us are up here today, to give you sort of this very brief picture into Nikkei history, whether in the United States, Canada, or whatnot. As the snow of lunch is getting stronger, and we're running out of time, I do want to take some questions from the audience, and then, Monica, do you want to say something real quick before we do that?
I'd just like to make a little pitch for this. If anyone is interested more in knowing about the Canadian experience, we have these sheets, and the video, Swimming Upstream, is available on YouTube. And the Politics of Racism Project, which is a book written by a Canadian, Anne Sunahara, is now available on Video Live, and of course it's all free. So for you young people in Latin America, if you're going to pursue, good for you, you might take a look at some of this stuff.
Do we have any questions from the audience? Oh, did we cover everything? Figured there had to be some,
I was just really curious in terms of the Japanese Latin American. Was Peru like the biggest country that had deportations, or is this also happening in like other Latin American countries? Like,
So you were asking about the Japanese Peruvians that were taken and brought here. Yeah. So overall, in terms of Japanese Latin Americans, there were 2,264 men, women, and children. Of these, 80%, and that's almost 1,800, came from Peru. So then we had a large contingent also from Costa Rica and like that. And I'm sorry I didn't bring my notes that can kind of break it down, but actually there's a lot more research that needs to be done, to get more on the numbers. And then, so they came from 13 countries, including Mexico. As I understand it, Mexico didn't send people supposedly to the United States to be interned, but we know there were Japanese Mexicans in our camp. So we need more research, around that. And then people think, well, maybe, what about the Brazilians? Because they have a big community too. They didn't send people to the United States, but when the hostage ship came, I think it was the second one, was it? They picked up 400 people. So then it's kind of like, well, who were those people? And so more research needs to be done on that. Or at least I don't know. So.
Thank you everyone for your wonderful presentations today. I was curious to hear more about this system of exchanging hostages. It's news to me, it was the first I've heard of it. So what is the interest the U.S. had to gather people from other places? It was prisoner bargaining? I was just wondering why the U.S. would really care to gather people from other countries for this purpose.
Okay, in terms of the United States, like during the late 1930s in particular, there was a lot of debate going on whether the United States was going to be drawn into the war. And so at that time, though, they began to make preparations of what to do if the United States got into it. So they started these negotiations of how do you return civilians back to their home countries, in a safe way. So this is supposed to be a humanitarian program, that if people want to return home during times of war, they should be able to do that, because war is fought by armies, not by civilians, And so then, but what happened was a humanitarian program turned into a program of massive human rights violations and war crimes. So as the war was going on in Asia, in particular, the United States would send out communiques to say, the war, we may be going to war, so people have to start coming home. And they did. But you had like businessmen, missionaries, tourists, just other people who didn't heed the call or didn't hear it or like that. So when the war happened, or when the United States officially joined in the war after Pearl Harbor, then there were thousands and thousands of people, U.S. citizens, that were caught in the war zones, whether in the Far East or in Europe. So the idea was how to bring those civilians home, in a safe way. So, and then Japan has that interest too, how to get their civilians home safely. So the United States was trying to figure out, and what they needed was bodies, and it didn't seem, I think they realized that there was a contradiction of using the Japanese Americans, because they were U.S. citizens, so you'd be exchanging U.S. citizens for U.S. citizens, the only difference being race, So they had to look elsewhere. So they looked to what the United States considered its own backyard, and that's Latin America. And then that's where, over 2,200 people of Japanese ancestry were taken.
It's almost like a work sense of morality there. So I've been told that we do need to end. Thank you all very much for your attention. So hopefully this has given everyone a baseline understanding of our history. This afternoon we'll be looking at the present, at what are some of the, we talked about a lot of the injustices that we as Nikkei have experienced. Today we're going to talk about some of the other injustices that Nikkei have been engaged on and involved in with other communities. So hopefully you'll join us for that. I understand that what is keeping us from lunch is there is a lost jacket in this room and we need to find it.
National Association of Japanese Canadians. And so we relate to JACL. We want to recognize our citizenship. We are Canadians, which I know that the Japanese Americans also recognize, right? You're Canadians of Japanese ancestry. You're Americans of Japanese ancestry. Peruvians, South Americans, Mexicans, and your heritage. So I know one of the things, so how many think, oh, Canada, nice country, we're so polite. Yeah, generally we are. We do. We bump into someone, we say, I'm sorry. We walk by, I'm sorry. We do tend to say that, I'll admit that. But I think one of the things as Canadians, we can't be complacent. I'm a guest here, but I do have to say, for the Americans, your Mr. Trump has caused us a lot of heartache too. We stand in solidarity with you, but I just have to say it affects us as well. So for us, Canada, being such close neighbors on the border, and I'll speak, I live in the Vancouver area, I get American channels, PBS, KCTS, Cairo, CBS, NBC, I get all those channels, so I see a lot of the news. Most of the Canadians you'll find have some sense of the American news and the political climate. I'm sorry folks, I'm getting a lot of conversation. Sorry, people in the back, I'm having conversations. Could you please keep it down? People in the front are trying to listen, so if you could please keep your voices down, take it outside, because there's people trying to listen here, and we've got some important subjects we'd like to share with you. So as I said, we don't want to be complacent, so it's not all your president's fault. As was said, David had said earlier in the morning, racism didn't start with the internment in 1942. We could also share stories. In 1907, there was an anti-Asian mob, 1,000 people or so, and these were leaders, mayor, political people that led that, and also, unfortunately, unions at the time were in a bad place. So racism didn't start with 1942. But one of the things that we noticed as well, and I guess the pivotal moment for us was 9/11, and that horror. But then after, there's that talk. Those people, how did they get in the US? Did they come through Canada? Those people, all those people, Muslim people, they're terrorists, they could kill your families. We start hearing that talk. And for Japanese Americans, we know you were the first ones to speak up, but Japanese Canadians as well. We were horrified. Like, how can you take a group of people based on their ethnicity, based on their religion, and say that they're all the enemy, that they're against us? People like our ancestors, longtime settlers, my family, my mother's side of the family came from Hiroshima in the 1800s. They actually came to the States first, and then, for whatever reason, two of the brothers didn't like the States, and then went up to Canada. And there's a white coal baron who was looking for cheap labor, so they ended up going to Vancouver Island and becoming involved in coal mining until they were interned. But anyway, the story, not just of my family, all of our families seeking a better life, seeking to make good, to have their families. And that's what all these families, whatever country they're coming from, seeking to make a better life and wanting a chance and working hard. But what's horrifying is it's 2019. Remember, our families, they work hard. My family, my father's side of the family, they get a fishing license, a fishing boat. My father's side of the family, they get their first car, they build up a business, they buy their homes. And then having people turn it around and go, those people, they're taking over. They're taking our jobs. They're buying up land. How dare they? And then in our case, in British Columbia, the provincial government then starts tracking it. So again, this is before the war. This is before Pearl Harbor. This is before the war was declared, before anything. Tracking. Who are these Japanese? They don't even dignify us by saying Canadians. They actually use the racial slur, Japs. Who are they buying land, tracking us? How many fishing licenses? And then conspire to take it away from us. We know that pain. So how dare people use it now against another group of people? And sadly, even in Canada, we are experiencing, not everyone, don't want to alarm you, it's still safe, you can come and visit us, but there are groups of Canadians, and frankly, there are some Americans who are in our country as well. And they are stirring up people with that. Who's got our jobs? Or terrorist actions? Who are these enemies? And we also, and I'm not going to read it all to you, but if you want it, I've got stats. Statistics Canada, the increase of hate crimes, increase of reported attacks, and it's different groups, including Jewish people, Muslims, and unfortunately they don't always distinguish between who's Muslim. It's basically a brown person, but increase. The National Muslim Organization, I can share the link with you, or share it with COPANI, they can share it with you, and I'll put it on COPANI Facebook. They're tracking the number of incidents. So there is that kind of thing, right? You're taking, like we have the BART in San Francisco, we have SkyTrain in Vancouver. There was a group of, actually it was young people from South America visiting, and a white woman yelled at them to quit speaking that language, speak English. Another man, and I think it might have been Toronto, screaming at someone, and he actually made the comment that these are foreigners, and he's sick of political correctness, and Mr. Trump has it right. Get rid of that bullshit political correctness. So that's the scary part, is we support you in your fight in the US, but also keep in mind, it's not just your country, it's affecting our country, it's affecting the world. People are seeing this and they're emboldened. One of the horrifying things for us is we're not really, we do have people that have guns, don't get us wrong, we do have people that have guns, people that even, one of my uncles, he doesn't eat beef, he goes out and he gets a deer for his meat, but he doesn't do it for sport hunting. But we do have people with guns, but not as much gun crime, but we are seeing an increasing incidence in gun crime. And one of the most horrifying things was in Quebec City, so in the province, so province like states, you have different states, we have provinces. In the state of Quebec, there was an attack on a mosque, and it left 6 people dead. And the person was, I'm not going to name them because I don't like the naming people, the perpetrators of violence. So he faced 6 counts of first-degree murder. He was known in the city as being a right-wing troll. He took an anti-foreigner, anti-feminist position. He is on record of standing up. President Trump is his hero. Again, I'm not saying Mr. Trump is causing this, but he is spurring them to action. So maybe before they would have had thoughts, but now they're taking action. This is very shocking for us because we're not used to that kind of violence. But again, the Canadians, we have to give our head a shake and recognize we can't just say, oh, it's just the US, it's just another country, because we're seeing it. We're seeing it with our neighbors, we're seeing it in our streets. There is an increase. There is more commentary when I've done some media with a good thing. So for example, we heard about Hastings Park where our families were kept in there, locked up in there before they were sent off to camps or sugar beet farms. And we did a good thing where we had a signage project, so signs to say that in this park, this is what happened to the families, and then also this is what happened to 22,000 Japanese Canadians, but 8,000 of them were kept in that park. And so we weren't asking for anything, it was just a good story, and a national networker, CBC, did a story, they posted it on the website, and just some of the rhetoric that's happening. And I know some of our news, our media, have actually stopped having commentary, having comment section on the websites because of some of the trolls. So there are some people that are specifically the trolls who are seeking out opportunities to spew their hatred. One of the things sometimes is we focus on the big things, the violence, which is horrible, and we need to speak out on that. But the other thing I want to also caution is about what we would call the microaggressions too. Some of those comments that some of us we know where it sounds like someone is maybe paying you a compliment, but it's reinforcing on a stereotype. It's maybe calling to question your language abilities. And that's the other thing, is to be very, very careful that we don't fall prey to that. Because one of the other things that we're seeing is, particularly with the Muslim community, is women who wear head coverings. And this has become an issue where spurious comments, what are they trying to hide, is one of the comments. So one of my friends actually did a really great graphic where she showed different women from different communities. So one being a Christian nun wearing a head covering. So why is it a head covering with a particular group is so egregious, so negative, and yet another person with a head covering isn't treated with that same that's in that same way, that disrespect. We've also had some violent encounters where Muslim women just minding their own business, walking on the street, and someone's trying to run up to them and grab their head covering to pull it off. The other thing that you've heard through some of these sessions, Senator Minata, Karen Korematsu had said about being at the table where decisions are being made, speaking up, don't be afraid to speak up. So one of the other things that I would also encourage, get people to vote. We do have power, we sometimes forget about that, but you need to get out and vote, you need to be where the decisions are being made. And so one of the last things I'll just share with you is, in Quebec again, they've passed a new bill, 21. I just want to read it to you. It's illegal to wear religious symbols at work, and they are targeting public school teachers, police officers, judges, prison guards, wildlife officers, crown prosecutor, any government public service positions. It's also laying out rules requiring citizens to uncover their faces to receive public services. It's a right of people to be able to access public services. There's also another immigration law, Bill 9, that they're allowing them to throw at a backlog of roughly 16,000 skilled immigrant worker applications. So that's the danger when someone says to you, well, what difference does it make? Oh, politicians do the same. Oh, I'm not into politics. Because when we're complacent and we're not involved in our politics, we're giving up our democracy. We're allowing the governments to create laws to make it okay to discriminate against a group of people. And this is targeting. This is targeting Muslims particularly. Doesn't say it, but we know it is. So just a few samples of the things that we are dealing with in Canada. I really appreciate that you are taking the time to attend this session, but more importantly, absorb this information, but I need all of you to make a promise to go back to your communities, talk to the people that you work with, your allies, your friends, but try to find one new person that you haven't told a story or shared something. Because we've got to grow this network. It can't be just the same people we're talking to over and over. We've got to grow the network and get more people. People taking a stand, people speaking out. Because we have power. But when we don't get together, we're not using that power. And if we don't use that power, we let the haters, we let them win. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think one thing we all agree on is part of why we do this is to try and break down stereotypes. And Lorene, thank you for totally demolishing the stereotype that Canadians are nice. At least compared to Americans. But Lorene really did capture a lot of the same sentiments that the Japanese American community has been involved in with the Muslim community. Obviously, a lot of it did start with September 11th. And the Japanese American community did really rally to make sure that what happened to us did not happen to Muslim Americans. I was actually at a candlelight vigil within, I think it might have been the next day or within a couple days, at the Japanese American Memorial of Patriotism in Washington, D.C. This was just months after I actually moved to Washington, D.C. So it was quite a shock that this was happening in my new hometown. But it was really powerful to see all the people gathered around, bathing candlelight, standing in solidarity that we would not allow what happened to all the camps that were written around that memorial, that would not happen to anyone else again. And actually we have Secretary Mineta here, who was also very involved in September 11th, and often tells his personal story of how he had connected with President Bush. And President Bush cited the example of Secretary Mineta as having been incarcerated as why we would not, as a country, do the same thing to the Muslims because of September 11th. So our stories do make that difference. As Lorene mentioned, though, there's been a change. Obviously, there's been this ongoing demonization of Muslims that we see. That the rhetoric, the hate crimes have continued and escalated. And today, what we're seeing though is actually state-sanctioned discrimination against Muslims, both in Canada and in the United States. So President Trump, when he ran for president, did not make it a secret that he did not like Muslims. It was a part of his campaign rhetoric. It was what his platform was based on. Muslims, immigrants, you name it, he didn't like them. And he was going to get them out, get rid of them, do whatever he could to make this country great again, which many of us interpret to be as white as possible. So he obviously won election. And the first, as Karen had mentioned earlier, the first thing he did was the Muslim ban. When that went into effect, Japanese Americans, along with hundreds and thousands of other people, streamed into the airports to protest and to make sure that the rights of Muslims coming into this country were not abridged. JCL, along with the Korematsu Institute, and Karen, along with all the other families who were originally part of the Supreme Court cases, we all filed advocacy briefs in opposition to the Muslim ban. And the reason for that was, if you look at the logic that the government today is using for the Muslim ban, it's because of for national defense purposes. That they're, again, making the claim that there is some sort of a security issue with these Muslims coming into this country. That's the exact same argument that was used to put Japanese Americans into the camps in the United States. We made this argument in our amicus brief. Unfortunately, the Supreme Court essentially said, we believe that there is a security reason that the government is doing this. And they essentially, again, bought into that false narrative, even though the evidence is overwhelming that the president himself has said, I'm going to put Muslims, I don't want Muslims coming into this country for the reason of them being Muslim. And yet, our Supreme Court has essentially validated this. The fight is not over. There is actually an effort now in Congress to try and prevent the implementation of the Muslim ban. So actually there's going to be a hearing in Congress this coming week on the legislation that has been introduced by Congresswoman Judy, the No Ban Act. So the fight is continuing to try and prevent this institutionalized, the state-sanctioned racism that's going on. So I think we'll talk a little bit more once we get to the discussion part of this about how can we all be active and engaged in fighting this pervasive racism that exists. So let me hand it over to Keiko. Are you going next?
Or, Kevin, you want to put the presentation or next slides?
Hey, thank you, David. My name is Keiko, and I'm from Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada. And I just want to start off by saying that when the National Association of Japanese Canadians achieved redress in 1988, we did feel that we should be the first to raise the awareness that discrimination and injustices, especially to the Indigenous people. And at that time, I believe we used to always say Aboriginal people. We should be the ones to recognize and support Aboriginal and Indigenous people. Because we went through a lot of we understand what it is to be discriminated against, and so we can try to do as much as possible. And I want to start by just showing you a map, because Winnipeg is in the heart of the continent. And some of you, when I say Winnipeg, you go, oh, is that in Canada? Yeah. So there's the green right in the middle, yeah, and that's Winnipeg right at the bottom part of it. I was born in British Columbia, which is on the far side, and I was born in Steveston, in a fishing village, and I was just born when we had to be removed from the West Coast. So we went to the interior of British Columbia first, and then to Manitoba. And in Manitoba, we all went to farms, and I think some of you who were there yesterday remember that we were, one of them went to sugarcane farms in Manitoba and Alberta, but we went later because we did go into the interior. And we were in a camp where, a place where it was, we had to pay for our own internment at that site. So I just wanted to go over a little bit, and somebody was saying that, oh, David, you were saying something about now Canada isn't as friendly, but I was going to say Winnipeg has a population of 800,000, and it's known for cold winters and warm hearts. So there you go. Okay, so anyway, the population of the indigenous people, there's about 93,000, and they are identified as First Nations, Métis, and Inuit. And just to all these terminologies, the First Nations are what they used to call Indian, and then Métis are a mix of indigenous and another nationality. And the Inoue are up north, so those are the three probably categories. In Manitoba there's 130,000, and in Canada there's about 1.6 million of all those three categories. And the First Nations people have about 50 distinct languages, and 95% of First Nations live on reserves. Okay, so I think it's interesting, you probably would like to, it'd be interesting to know that the treaty Indian status is something that, and I don't know whether they have it in the United States or not, but these are First Nations living in reserves are usually of treaty status. So in 1884, the amendment of the Indian Act mandated education for Indian children to read and write English. So the major churches, such as the Catholic Church, worked with the federal government to form a residential school system which subjected children to forced conversions, sickness, abuses, and what has been described recently as an attempt at genocide by the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. The effects are felt for generations, and as we probably could relate to that, because we as internees also are affected for many generations, and they've had loss of language, customs, spirituality teaching, and struggle with identity and family. Colonialism has affected the indigenous people in ways that will take generations to overcome. Some of the First Nations northern reserves in Manitoba have been known to have no running water, poor living conditions, higher suicide rates among the young people, and it's a real concern about the young people and the suicide rates there. Even in the news the other day, there was a big concern, and the highest number of incarcerated people in the penal system. As far back as 2005, the Assembly of First Nations, Nations Chief, signed a historic political accord to resolve the legacy of residential schools. And in 2008, Canada's Prime Minister publicly apologized to Canada's Indigenous people, admitting that residential schools were part of a Canadian policy on forced Indigenous assimilation. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission mandate focused on promoting healing, educating, listening, and a report with recommendations. The Commissioners of the Truth and Reconciliation of Canada had held 7 national gatherings across Canada. And the first one was held in Winnipeg, and so I attended that. It was at the Forks, which it's sort of a very historical place where people came and settled. The Red River and the Assiniboine kind of joined to make the Forks. So this is the Manitoba Japanese Cultural Association signed an accord, and this is a picture of that. And Art signed an accord for the JCAM, our association, And there were a city and organizations and all coming together to sign the support. The commissioners compiled this report with 10 principles of reconciliation and 94 calls to action. The National Center for Truth and Reconciliation, the permanent archival repository for all statements, documents, and materials, is located at the University of Manitoba. That's why I thought I'd just focus mostly on Winnipeg and Manitoba, because there are a lot of significant things that have been happening there. And as a result of this signing report, people have to kind of pledge to meet with Indigenous people, to share stories, and to really come to know one another. And I think that's really, conciliation that's what it's really all about, is forming relationships with our community and with others. And I was going to mention just about the United Nations adopted the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People in September of 2017. On the call to action, one of the call to action is a consistency between this declaration and the federal and provincial laws. Treaties were disrespected and violated. In June of this year, Parliament closed before the Senate approved to recognize Bill C-262 to recognize this. So there is still a lot of work to be done, I think, in our system. As mentioned, 59% of the First Nations people live in the northern reserves. And so young women coming to the city and children under the care of family services have disappeared and have been found murdered. And this has been going on for many years, and there's many people who are affected by this. Many blame the complacency and the lack of interest by the police and the systems to prevent this from happening and to solve the cases of the missing women. So many of them have never been found, and they're still waiting. The families are still waiting even to recover their bodies, or so it's a real concern today. So they did form a national inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, and that was established in 2016 by the Government of Canada. And the data shows that the number of missing and murdered Indigenous women is disproportionately high compared to percentage of the total population both in Canada and the United States. A final report called Reclaiming Power and Place was made public this past June in 2019 that is still to be implemented. So just as an example, in Winnipeg there have been a number of young girls and women who have gone missing, and one of them, and I think this is quite a big, I don't know whether most people may have heard of Tina Fontaine, and she was only 15, and it's just a tragic tragedy, because her father was murdered, and then her mother had substance abuse. So she was with her grandparents, but she came into the city by herself, and through family service, and then she ran away, and then she was found murdered, and just put weights on in the river. So these are kind of tragedies that are happening to a lot of the young girls. And I just want to mention, in Manitoba, we just had an election, and it's a conservative government that got in. But the main focuses that they wanted to do is poverty, health, environment, and reconciliation. So I think I just mentioned here, reconciliation. So out of the 57 seats, there was 7 Indigenous candidates that were elected. A large number of them were also running, which was really quite encouraging to see that they are becoming more involved in the political system, And so hopefully they'll have a little more power in deciding a lot of their fate. So I guess, so anyway, thank you for coming and listening. And this is just a very short, brief report, and it's from the perspective of coming from Winnipeg. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Keiko. Judy, would you like to tell us a little bit about how you've been working with, so that she's a social economicist with poverty and housing and homelessness?
Thank you. My name is Judy Hanazawa, and I'm the president of the Greater Vancouver Japanese Canadian Citizens Association, which is a member organization of the National Association. And so I'm from Vancouver, and so the area that I'm going to talk about is within the Vancouver area. It's known as the Downtown East Side. It has a history, which is one which tells a tale of, first of all, the indigenous people of the area who were displaced, followed by waves of communities which were displaced and dispossessed. And Japanese Canadians had a business district in this area before the war. And of course, as you all probably know, because of 1942, and I guess decades of racism, institutionalized racism, directed at our community too at the time. In 1942, because of the war and the uprooting and so on, the community of the area, which was Japanese Canadian, known as Paulorugai in Japanese, or Palo Street, kind of disappeared overnight and never recovered. But in sort of giving you a picture of the general area, it was first of all First Nations territory, the territory of the Musqueam, the Tsleil-Waututh, and the Squamish people. And so the area has retained the character of indigenous culture within sort of a multicultural mix. But I also wanted to mention, as Keiko did, that in British Columbia, because there was only one treaty that was signed off, which is Treaty 8 in the northeast, most of British Columbia is unceded indigenous territory. And so when people participating in resistance in the area called the Downtown East Side, Rise Up First Nations people, they're speaking from the truth that they never ever ceded their land. There was never any treaty. So as Grace did, when she acknowledged the indigenous people here, the general rule is when you have an event, you first recognize the territory upon which your event is taking place. So this is what happens in Vancouver. At every event, there's always an acknowledgement of the unceded territory. So with the Downtown East Side and the area where we also have our history, as I said, there's an indigenous quality to it along with the mix, but it is also known as the poorest postal code in Canada. It's also known as an area where there is crime, poverty, drug addiction, and homelessness. This is the area. If you visit Vancouver and you go along Hastings Street, you will see this. You will see this. So I'm going to refer to a study which was started in 2014 out of the University of Queen's University, and it was from their geography department, and it was called The Right to Remain. And this academic project actually sort of transitioned from being academic with, interestingly, mostly Japanese Canadian academics involved with it, Jeff Masuda, Audrey Kobayashi, and this wonderful master's student that I got a lot of information from, named Angela Kruger. They all had Japanese ancestry. And so they were personally interested in the area because one of the other things that has happened in the Downtown East Side is what's called the Powell Street Festival. And every year in Oppenheimer Park in the area, there's a gathering a festival in August, and Japanese Canadians from all over Canada come to the Powell Street Festival. It's for some because of the internment and the dispossession and the dispersal. It's like a coming home, so they do come. And so with the Powell Street Festival and the study, one of the things that has developed is this wonderful kind of partnership with the locals. And the understanding that the Powell Street Festival is like, it initially was like a bit of an invasion because Japanese Canadians had left, but because of the sons, say, the third generation taking interest in a coming home process for themselves personally, the festival began. And then there was an understanding that it was like a summer invasion. And so the need was to reach out and look at the community around them, look at ways to partner and advocate and to work with the local community to address the needs of the area. And so this was the relationship that developed through the Powell Street Festival Society. And lately, and I have to tell you that this history of dispossession and so on, the waves of it continue on and on. So after the Japanese Canadians left, were uprooted and left, what happened was there was, in 1939, there was almost a 50% rate of Japanese ownership of rooming houses along Powell Street. But with the uprooting, that all was gone. And ever since then, according to the study done by Jeff and so on, by Judy study, there was this sense of detachment from the people who owned these places and the people who lived in them. And that's been a quality of the area ever since. There's a lot of rooming houses, there's a lot of substandard housing, and the people who are struggling to make ends meet are living in these substandard places. And so what happened with the last Powell Street Festival in last August was that because of the level of homelessness, the Powell Street Festival, which takes place in Oppenheimer Park in the area, became a campground for people who were homeless. And so the decision was made in support of that Powell Street would still happen in August, but it would take place along Alexander Street, which was one street north of Powell Street, where the park was. And so this was another gesture of taking partnership, of demonstrating partnership and support with the local people who needed housing. The Oppenheimer Park was filled with people in their tents, and they were all desperate. They did not have homes. They were people who were homeless. And so the support was there for that, for what they were going through. I just want to read from a memo that was given to me by Jean Swanson. Jean Swanson is a city councilor who has been an advocate for people living in poverty going back to the 1970s. So this is what she said as the latest on the Oppenheimer Park campers. She said, the park is still occupied by lots of tents. Some people who were there have been housed, but there is no housing left. She wrote this on September 16th. I've got a motion coming up for October 1st, which hasn't been finalized, but my hope is to get something in place to the 600 plus unsheltered homeless in Vancouver so they can be secure and warm over the winter. The best option would be to buy a hotel, which is Jean's kind of thinking. But it's hard to get the votes for that. Modular is good, and there's been more of a project lately to develop fast-built modular housing. Modular is good, but no action happening from the province to give the city the needed units yet. So that can't happen till spring at the earliest, although one building, about 50 units, should be ready in February. 2,223 counted homeless people in Vancouver, 600 plus of them unsheltered. Average rents for one bedroom apartment in Vancouver is $2,000. Welfare shelter rate is $375. There are 3 more SRO hotels. 3 of the best privately owned ones in the downtown east side are for sale as gentrified micro units. So more gentrification is happening. You can also focus on the amazing solidarity, which she's complimenting us, that the Japanese community has shown to downtown east side low-income residents. She's very nice. Gina's a wonderful person. I'm sure it will be a great presentation, so she's talking about telling about all this. So I'm just going to end this presentation by talking about the Japanese Canadian community. In 2013, the City of Vancouver apologized to Japanese Canadians for the uprooting and the dispossession and so on, and not knowing that the city profited from the properties that were dispossessed from our people. And so, based on that, the apology was developed along with Japanese Canadians, and one of our dear elders, Grace Thompson, was actually part of the committee to develop that apology. And I've got the apology here. I'm not going to read it all out, but I'll read out the part that Grace insisted be included. It says, "Be it further resolved that the City of Vancouver pledges to do all it can to ensure such injustices will not happen again to any of its residents, thereby upholding the principles of human rights, justice, and equality now and in the future." So I just wanted to read this out just to illustrate that there have been attempts between Japanese Canadians to work in support of the locals of the downtown east side. And it is an ongoing work in progress. I think Maryka mentioned our BC Redress project that's going on right now. And part of our hope is to reclaim property in the area, but we're always mindful of the needs of the locals. And also, we're taking a position of never, ever uprooting anybody else as we were, as First Nations people were. And so, along with the project of reclaiming, we're also saying we need to also, at the same time, do what we can to meet the needs of the people of the area. So thanks for listening, and I hope you learned something about this part of Vancouver. Thank you.
So you want to cue up the video, or do you want me to go straight to the video?
Five Japanese American elders, survivors of the U.S. internment camps, engaged in civil disobedience outside the Fort Sill Army Post in Oklahoma, where the Trump administration plans to indefinitely detain 1,400 immigrant and refugee children starting next month. Fort Sill was an internment camp for 700 Japanese American men in 1942. It was one of more than 70 sites where the U.S. government incarcerated about 120,000 Japanese and Japanese Americans during World War II, including one of 14 U.S. Army bases. President Obama first used Fort Sill in 2014 to detain migrant children seeking asylum from violence in Central America. Last December, Jake McCall, a 7-year-old Guatemalan girl, became one of 6 children to die in Border Patrol custody in less than a year after she was held in a Customs and Border Patrol facility near the site of another former U.S. internment camp in Lordsburg, New Mexico. Well, Democracy Now! Was there in Fort Sill, Oklahoma on Saturday, when the Japanese American elders incarcerated in these camps risked arrest to protest along with descendants of survivors.
My name is Satsuki Ina. I'm a former child incarcerated during World War II. This is a photograph of me when I was in prison. 75 years ago, 120,000 of us were removed from our homes and forcefully incarcerated in prison camps across the country. We're here today to protest the repetition of history. We were in camps. We were held under indefinite detention. We were without due process of law. We were charged without any evidence of being a threat to national security, that we were an unassimilable race, that we would be a threat to the economy. We hear these exact words today regarding innocent people seeking asylum in this country. And unlike 1942, when America turned their back on us, while we were disappearing from our homes, our schools, our farms, and our jobs, we're here today to speak out, to protest the unjust incarceration of innocent people seeking refuge in this country. We stand with them, and we are saying, stop repeating history.
My name is Satsuki Ina. I'm from Concord, California, and I spent the first 4.5 years in a concentration camp. I was born in Topaz, Utah, and I'm here to protest against the incarceration of the immigrant children here at Fort Sill.
I'm Miki and on December 7, 1941, in Seattle, Washington, I was celebrating my 4th birthday when the FBI interrupted my birthday party and removed my father to Lordsburg, New Mexico, the DOJ camp, and subsequently Santa Fe, New Mexico. My mother and I were incarcerated at the Puyallup Fairgrounds called Camp Harmony, and later in Minidoka, Idaho.
You cannot protest on Fort Sill. If you want to protest, you have to go across the street to the highway, and that needs to happen right now. Let's go, now, today.
My name is Shimizu.
No, you may not. Again, I will say this is the last time. You cannot protest on Fort Sill. You need to move across the street now.
Shimizu, would you like to make a statement? Yes.
Apparently you didn't hear what I said. You need to move today, now, right now. Move. That's what's going to happen. I don't know how I want to arrest you, but you need to move now. Yes, you're going to move.
If you're not going to arrest us, we're not going to move.
Yes, I spent 3.5 years at Poston, Arizona, an American concentration camp during World War II, and I'm here to bear witness to the travesty of the American justice system, in that the family separation policy, which is ruining the lives of these children. I'm very incensed about the government policy of separating parents, and we the people have to stand up and protest this.
My name is I'm the executive director of Gensha. It's a nonprofit in Seattle. And one of the things that Gensha does is we're the story keepers for the community, especially what happened during World War II. And so I came here to honor the story of Hanazawa, who was shot and killed here. 9 years ago, I interviewed his son in Kana, Hawaii, and he told me how this man with 11 children and businesses in Kona was taken for no crime and brought here. And the trauma of being here, the stress, he ended up essentially, as his son said, snapped. And he started climbing the fence in broad daylight saying, I want to get home. And as the other attorney said, don't shoot, a guard came up and shot him in the back of his head and killed him. And so in his honor, I'm here to remember Hanazawa.
My name is Paul Tomita. I'm from Seattle, Washington. This is me in 1943. As a 4-year-old. And so what we did was here is I had to have this to get out.
Look. I understand your issues, okay? But you cannot protest on
the children who are going to be around here.
Satsuki, can you please describe what's happening here?
They're wanting to remove us. We've been removed too many times. If that's what it comes to, we will stay here and.
What don't you people understand?
And the whole history of this country, and we aren't going to let it happen again. What were you saying about Satsuki?
That we want to make a stand. We want to say that we are protesting the fact that 1,400 children are going to be brought to this military site. We're here because we do not want to have that happen. And as former children of prison camps, of concentration camps in America, we are saying no more, never again.
That was the scene at Fort Sill Army Post.
So why would 60 white-haired Japanese Americans with their hearing aids and walkers and all their medications travel to Fort Sill, Oklahoma? You know, we started in the beginning thinking that we wanted to tell our story. So we started in March of this year. This has all happened in this past year in March. We organized with Japanese Peruvians, including Grace Shimizu, a pilgrimage to Crystal City. And 40 miles west of Crystal City on the very same highway is the Dilley Family Detention Facility. So it made sense for us when we did the pilgrimage to Crystal City to travel and remember our own histories and make a statement about our protesting incarceration of children again. And so we asked the community, we were just a small grassroots group of people, we asked the community, we put the word out and said, you know, we'd like to take, we started this conversation, it was like, let's make 1,000 cranes. Cranes representing peace and compassion, but also the wings of freedom. And, you know, Miki, one of the co-organizers, said, well, let's ask for 10,000 cranes. By the time we got to Dilley, Texas, we had received 30,000 paper cranes from across the country from Japanese Americans. People identified in ways that we didn't expect or really understand. We had so many paper cranes coming from across the country, we had to spend the whole Friday night unpacking box after box after box. And what we did was we hung these paper cranes on the fence that separated us from the children who were being held in the family detention facility. So it was a small gathering, but a very kind of revitalized enthusiasm about the importance of our story as a way of influencing policy that was being implemented today. Sometime after that pilgrimage protest in March, we heard that 1,400 children, unaccompanied minors and children separated from their parents, were going to be incarcerated at Fort Sill, Oklahoma. And we also knew that at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, 700 men of Japanese ancestry were part of the first sweep out of the Japantowns and incarcerated at Fort Sill. And Tommy Keda from Densho informed us about the story of Mr. Oshii. And we thought, okay, we need to show up. And So this is what you witnessed, and the evening before that event, we knew that it was going to be questionable about whether we could actually protest on a military site. But every single one of the survivors that were there decided that if necessary, we would be arrested. We would commit an act of civil disobedience as part of our protest. And I have to say we're all really scared because we've never been arrested before. There were some. Chizu Omori, who had experienced and committed civil disobedience in the past, was familiar with it. But many of us knew that in order to make our position known and utilize the story of our own historical trauma and mass incarceration to have impact today, that it might lead to that. As it turns out, at this first in June protest at Fort Sill, we didn't get arrested. Our intent was to finish our stories for each survivor, and then we would leave and have a rally at a park nearby. 5 days after this incident happened, I got a call from the Army reporter. He said, "We'd like to get a comment from you." And I said, "About what?" He said, "Well, we just learned that Lieutenant Colonel Keys, who was barking at us, had just been suspended. And they wanted to know what our reaction was." And I said, "Okay, can I call you right back?" Okay, so I hung up the phone, and then I said, and there were a group of us at a gathering, and I told them what happened, and we started to feel this sense that we could have an impact, that there could be some effect. So I called the reporter back, and I said, we don't need him to be punished. We do want him to be trained and educated about how to handle people who are protesting. The bigger thing that came out of that experience was the local social justice groups who joined us after they heard that we were coming decided to, with the pending arrival of the children, decided to put on another protest. And they invited us to come back to be a part of this now major gathering of organizations across the state of Oklahoma. And so we joined them, and in July had another major protest with 500 people showing up. And a week after that protest, it was announced that the children would not be brought to Fort Sill. Now, when they announced that, they didn't say we had anything to do with it, but we registered it as a victory. And so there are many things we've learned. The immigration policies that are being implemented today are Orwellian. They're frightening. They're in many ways shockingly unbelievable that it's happening in our democracy. Children being separated from their parents, being denied basic human physical needs, and in a state of mass incarceration. And what we're learning, it wasn't as if we planned or knew that this was going to go anywhere larger and greater. But what we learned are two things. One is why should we, the question is, and people ask this all the time, why should we care about other groups? And what the organizers and with the people that have joined us, we've processed, the evenings before and afterwards, why are we taking this risk? Why are we taking the time, out of our own pockets to make this stand? And we're realizing that we are all connected, that trauma, oppression, mass incarceration splits, divides, and breaks communities apart. You've heard that all weekend. Ways in which our families were demolished, our businesses, our careers, our futures. And that coming back from that kind of trauma has taken decades. And one of the ways in which the healing is going to take place is when we forge together our shared efforts, when we begin to really believe and act on the principle, the human principle of looking out for each other, and to use our history as a tool, as a weapon against the continued fracturing of societies and communities of people. So our collective group of a few people, and then 60 people, and then 500 people, has grown enormously just in these months from March. And we are now planning a mass national pilgrimage to close the camps in June 5th to the 7th. We're going to go to Washington, D.C. We want to bring enough paper cranes to represent every single person that was incarcerated during World War II. That will include Japanese Americans, Japanese Canadians, Japanese Hawaiians, Japanese Latin Americans. And we want to take these cranes to hang them in front of the White House. And we are called Suda for Solidarity. Our mission and our purpose is to use our story to gather people together, cross communities. And the really beautiful second outcome of this whole process is these other organizations like Bend the Arc, Black Lives Matter, Council on American-Islam Relations, Dream Action, all of these other national organizations that have been working within their own silos have responded to our story and reaching out to us. And so we're working as a across-the-country network of organizations and groups of people to protest together our historical experience of oppression and fractured communities. Mass incarceration has been a solution that has been imposed on every community of color that has ever lived in the United States and in other countries as well. And so we're getting signatures. We have a table back there. Carol Hayashino, who is compulsively folding tsudu on our behalf, and Chizu Omori are back at the table there where you can get more information. You can get on a sign-up list if you'd like to join us. We're hoping to have thousands of people of Japanese ancestry show up. We're organizing in a way to have the largest gathering of people of Japanese ancestry in Washington, D.C., the largest gathering since we were incarcerated during World War II. So I hope you'll join us. Thank you.
Thank you, Satsuki. Can we have everyone else come back up now? A little bit of discussion and then open up for questions. So the way that this was kind of structured today is the morning was kind of a look at inside our own community, and this afternoon is kind of a look out to other communities. One of the challenges of working with other communities, obviously, is you need to work with that community and going into their community, working in their space. How do you go about that so that we aren't intruders or imposing upon these other communities that we work with?
Very good question. I think for all organizations or groups, even allies, one of the things is we need to listen first. So sometimes with our impulse, and don't get me wrong, it's great, you're passionate, you want to help out, but for instance, indigenous communities, we have that passion, we want to help, but first we need to ask them, how can we help you? And not assume. I know sometimes with other countries too, if there's been involved with like garment workers and so forth, and our first instinct is, let's boycott! But what we do is we ask the workers, how can we help you? So I know one of the workers said, no, don't do that. If you do that, then we lose all our income, we'll starve. But how you can help us is protest as consumers. Protest to the companies and say, stop child labor, have safe working conditions. So the first thing I think is listen, go with your good intentions and say that you want to help out, how can we help you? And listen to what they say. But don't impose our own values or beliefs. We try to do that approach as best we can, and in Canada, as you've heard from Keiko and Judy, Indigenous groups, it's been very powerful. We've been involved with Truth and Reconciliation, and the Indigenous organizations there have been very welcoming and organized different events where we've participated, and we learned a bit about their culture, we listen to their stories in here, and then offer our support and help. Same thing with Muslim organizations. Sometimes it's even just a quiet approach of just showing solidarity or showing up for vigils and having the presence there. But all I can say is first, we need to listen.
I was going to say listening, and I did mention that with the Truth and Reconciliation, it was about building relationships. So it's important for communities to meet the communities in our own communities who are Indigenous leaders or people, and to listen to them, and we also share with one another and get to know them. And I think we can't just go in and do things. It's the same as when I think we were we had our stories, but we didn't want somebody else telling our story. So it's the same thing with them. We need to support them and listen and see what they want.
I think I would say the same thing. The process that I'm thinking mostly about, talking about the downtown east side, is the Powell Street Festival Society and the annual Powell Street Festival. The festival started in 1977, I believe, or 78. So in the beginning, this festival took place every summer, seemingly without any issue for the surrounding communities. But I believe that there were issues, but nobody was picking up on them. But eventually, it was something that the Powell Street Festival Society people themselves began to understand. And so from there on, they reached out and they said, you've been permitting us to be in your area, for a few years, and we'd like to know how we can be of some help. And so from there, the organization putting on the festival actually grew, and it got to the point where there was an advocacy committee. So it was part of the actual functioning of the organization to look at how they could be advocates for the area. And I think there's been very good relations at that point. Even with the academic project, The Right to Remain, there was a real initial process of making sure that this project was acceptable in the community. And gradually it became to the point of a working partnership. The Greater Vancouver JCC, my organization, was a partner organization as well in that project. But it was interesting how, with the struggle of the people who were dealing with drug addiction, there's crime in the area and so on. But what wasn't known was that that area also had community, and that people were looking out for each other. But these things wouldn't have been known if you didn't really take a deeper look. And I think there was a lot of growth that happened with the Powell Street Festival people understanding and gaining knowledge about the community around them. And at this point, it's as if when Powell Street Festival comes, there's a general relaxation between the neighborhood and the festival people, and it proceeds. And at the same time, there's an ongoing, constant process of Powell Street Festival people reaching out and addressing issues along with the neighborhood about what's needed and where they can stand up, where we can go to the city council and protest issues along with them. And certainly with people like Jean Swanson, who's a city councillor, that we stand completely with her on things that she is bringing up to city council. So it's been a really major learning process, but you need to be able to think about what you should be doing and being examined your own self, I think, too, about what is important as a way to show expected respect and have respect for the people that are there, that have actually allowed people to come into their area. And I think the indigenous quality of the area, the profile, has taught that the bottom line is respect. We learn that all the time knowing indigenous people. Their primary value is respect. And I think we all learn from that.
Well, just so quickly, I've been reminded that we need to do more than run up and down the street with placards. And the groundwork that happens before our protest is coalition building. And that means relationships. Personal, face-to-face, one-to-one conversations, forming trust as a basis for moving forward. And out of respect for that process that we've learned so much, on the second day, on the 7th of our June national event, we're going to be holding a full day of what we're calling Healing Circles for Change. We're going to form groups, small groups, for cross-community conversation. And our hope is that we'll have people from indigenous communities, the Latinx community, religious groups, along with Japanese Americans, sitting in small groups in different classrooms at a nearby university. And all they'll be doing there is listening to each other share our stories. We found it so powerful when we went to the border at Laredo. We went to visit the mothers and children who were waiting for dispensation to have their immigration status. And they're being housed there by a bunch of volunteers, most of them DACA recipients who go there on their days off from class and their jobs to provide support to these families. And so we decided to sit in a circle. It was very impromptu. We decided to sit in a circle, and we wanted to hear what their experience was, but we felt like it was important for us to share our stories first, so we wouldn't just be taking advantage of their personal trauma. What was shocking to us was, as we told our stories, these mothers shed tears hearing our story. They had so much compassion for us, and it's in that shared compassion that we felt this deep connection. We made relationships with the volunteers there, the organizers, and the mothers and the children there in ways that could never happen if we didn't hear each other's stories. So we're going to try and replicate that in Washington, D.C. on the second day after our march in Maryland.
So a couple of you actually mentioned stories, which is a very powerful part of our advocacy as Japanese Americans, Japanese Canadians. How do you use the story to speak to different issues? Because our story is so powerful, it can be applied in many different ways. How do you make those adaptations so that you can speak out about whether it's homelessness or whether it's Islamophobia, which are two very different things, but can be adapted from the Japanese American or Japanese Canadian experience?
I think one of the things, I gotta stand up. One of the things is that it's kind of been given to us, and I said that when I talked earlier. When you start hearing those comments, those people taking our jobs, the actual words spoken by people today against Muslims, for example, those are the words we could have pulled out from newspapers from 1942. And so I think it's that commonality. So the rhetoric, that hate-filled rhetoric, affected our community so much. And it's being repeated today in 2019. And it's not even just about relating it to communities, it's also for people who say, well, that happened in the past. What? That's like over 75 years. Why are you bringing up that now? Why, right? You've heard that, right? And that's one of the things you can bring to home, make it to home for them, is that the same hate-filled words
that in 1988, when we got the apology, never again. Well, guess what, folks? It's happening again. So relating it to time, why is it relevant now? But also relating it to a group of people. So for me, with the Muslim community, relating it to what they're experiencing now. And then also some of the stories too about, you look like the enemy, right? And then so some of the things that's happening with the Muslim community is the women, well, why are you wearing a head covering? You must be hiding something. So it's that commonality. So again, that takes time with what Keiko and Judy and Satsuki were saying about building the relationship, listening. When you start to listen and you have that empathy and we're crying with each other's stories, but then you're finding the commonality. And that's what we share, and that's how the stories relate.
I was just going to mention that in Winnipeg, we're now gathering interviews that were done in 1988 and 1977 of people who are gone now, but they were basically the Inoue. And so we're digitalizing all the cassettes, and we're gathering photos and putting them into our sort of like a resource place where our younger people and others can come and do some research. So I think it's the stories that are really powerful, I think, and people can relate to it, in a lot of ways. And it can also be given to classrooms and as lessons learned, and because the basic thing about it, and the common thing is racism, and so you could open up all kinds of discussions coming out of what happened, and I think so. That's really the important part. I think is to tell our stories, and others will learn about it, and then try to never let it happen again. But that's sort of pie in the sky. But I guess those are the things we want to see happen.
I don't have that much more to add, except that I'm aware that stories are very, very powerful. Apart from factual information about a history, it's listening to the actual stories of people that really resonate. And interestingly, back when Satsuki came to Vancouver to help us with a conference called Honoring Our People, at that time, there was a huge to-do in our community because we were told that people did not want to share their stories, that our community wanted to be silent and move on. But we learned actually, and Satsuki, you were such a wonderful ally for us, but we learned that people did want to share their stories. They did. And I think it's true that when human beings share their stories with each other, they find their common ground. And it is a way of bridging between people and for people to develop partnerships with each other. So I'm a real advocate for the power of stories.
So when mass incarceration happens, there's a shame and humiliation for the victims of that. And a natural response is to withdraw afterwards, to let the time pass and let's forget about it. And we found that for the survivors especially that participated, that sharing their personal stories and hearing others' personal stories, we found the ways in which we were different, but very prominently was the shared theme of what we had in common. Our humanity, our destruction of our communities, our loss of language, things that, in finding that common thread bonded us. I know now that if I had a problem and I needed to contact people I met in Laredo, that they would show up. That's the kind of bonding that took place. It was so powerful. And as a country, as a world even, it's this kind of human connection that will build the army we need to oppose the way in which we've gone off track.
one thing I'm kind of recognizing here, and I hope all of you are kind of recognizing, is that here we have 4 women. So I'd like to actually use that to segue into another perspective of what are some other issues that we as a community address or need to address. And I think sexism is definitely one of them, because I think for so many years that is what prevented our communities from addressing some of these issues, to be able to talk about things, because men don't like to talk about their emotions. And here we have 4 women, and all of them are emphasizing the need to talk about what happened. And I think that is a big change that's happening in our community, that we are allowing our women to speak up, and I think that's a very important thing. I'd like to open up both to the panel and also to anyone in the audience, perhaps. What are other communities that we need to be working with, need to be speaking out for, and speaking with? Because we only talked about a few here, and we have a lot of problems in this world.
I think one of the things we need, I'm 4th generation, you'll say. Most of my cousins are, you call it half, right? Half Japanese, half. I think one of the things we need to recognize that we don't stereotype within our own community as well, which I'm not saying we do, but anyway, that there's the multi-generation Japanese Canadian, but then there's the Japanese Canadian who's a new immigrant who came from Japan. There is within our own multi-generation Japanese Canadian, like my cousins, who share different cultures. So whether it's Italian, German, or actually indigenous and Japanese culture. We also have to recognize not only gender issues, but ageism. So I know the young workers feel sometimes that they're thought of as empty vessels without any experience or leadership, and actually some of them have great leadership skills and lots of experience. But on the other hand, and I'm starting to feel my age now, don't write off anyone over 40. It's not that everyone that's over 40 is stuck in the past, won't look at change, like, hello, I'm into social media, tech. So don't stereotype either on age. The other thing I think that's becoming more aware, more prevalent in our society, not just our community, is issues around ability. And sometimes the disabilities, the physical that we think of, using mobility aids, but the invisible challenges, like mental health, there's still a stigma about that. People, I know a colleague said that when he came back to work in his office, he had a mental health challenge. Somebody else came back with a broken arm. Everybody's giving the other person flowers, sign her cast, talk to her. He came back to work and people didn't talk to him. There's still ongoing issues around the world with LGBTQ2S. So there's still many areas that we need to work on. So it's not just about cultural groups. There's accessibility, there's diversity, and diversity not just meaning in terms of race. And the whole idea of inclusion. And what does inclusion mean? And so one of the things with my work with different groups in the government is I said that, it's great, everybody knows to say, yes, we celebrate diversity. But it's more than just talking about it. It's what are you actually doing? Are you checking? Are there any systemic barriers? Like, well, with the gender issue that you brought up. So back in the day, right? Oh, no. Yeah, women don't want to be executives. Yeah, we don't have anyone who applies or is interested. Okay, do you think one of the reasons is because the system you set up makes it darn impossible for the women? So there's still a lot of areas that we need to look at, and really what I call it's moving from the we celebrate diversity to actually what are we doing to include people. One of the things I'd like to mention, Judy mentioned it, but Grace Shimizu, I don't know if she's here, shout out to Grace, thank you for bringing up, for Indigenous. So that's a good example of inclusion is, Judy mentioned it, that in Canada more and more now, like I know with the British Columbia government, with every meeting they open with recognizing the territory, and we call it unceded because we don't have treaties with the different bands. So we recognize the different territories, and then more globally for British Columbia, we also said Coast Salish to represent the whole sort of British Columbia area. And that's one way you can we show Indigenous communities that it's not just talk. We actually want to recognize First Peoples in Turtle Island.
Yeah, I was just going to mention, related to gender, when I became involved in the 1980s, I'm probably one of the oldest people here, but anyway, at that time, you kind of knew, if you said something, it was basically a male-dominated conversations that went on, and so you were either a nuisance or you just weren't listened to. So you kind of knew when to speak up and when not to. So this is something that I learned that even now, where I don't, unless I really have a point to make, then I'll make it. But I tend to be, hesitant still, even though I've had, all this experience. And so this is something that I think in most communities, there was a gender, there was always decisions made by the men, and the women were supposed to go to the kitchen and bring out the goodies, type of thing. So I think it's changed so much, and now I think there are other issues like that our own communities are not addressing, like especially the Japanese Canadian community. I'm not sure whether we've ever talked about, things like gender and LGBTQ and things like that we never talk about. So I think we are going to try to have Zoom type of conversations where they're like a safe place, and people can come online if they choose to, and they can, we'll have topics where they talk about a certain topic, and there will be people who want to be there to discuss those. So, there's a new generation, and they're going to have new issues that they want to talk about, and hopefully we're open to having those discussions.
I think everybody here has made some wonderful points. I guess what I do know is that being involved right now with the BC Redress Project and strategy, one of the things that was most interesting to me was that we had the younger generations who wanted to bring up the ways that their families had suffered. And it wasn't so clear previously that there could be that openness about the actual effects that go on from one generation to another. So this was something that I think is something to go forward with, to really look at our own community, our own families, and to see about the trauma effects that everybody has gone through. And I guess a little bit about other related issues too, based on redress, is just being able to, as a community, overcome the tendency to I think, and I have to say this is my own opinion, so I'm not judging anybody else, but I do feel that there's a tendency to still want to look like normal people.